Hey folks, thank you once again for joining us on Sunday School Bonanza. We're excited to be here with you this week. Brand new episode here in 2017. I'm dating this so that you know that we mean it. Anyway, we're excited to be here. Church history, all that good stuff. A little rusty, so we hope I can work out some of the kinks as we get into this episode. But before we do that, I would like to introduce my fellow luminary, the wonderful founder and, can I call you a CEO now, of Leading LDS, Kurt Francom is in the house, folks.
Go on. You know, I don't want to be the guy who shows up to the network party and says he's a CEO, and then they find out I'm the only guy working there. So I like to go for the title of Executive Director of Leading LDS.
Whatever you want, man. Titles are titles. I'm all for it.
It's true. It's true.
I live in a rather title-happy area, so I'm all for doing whatever you want.
But call me what you will. I've got all sorts of hats I wear through my life, but I'm grateful to be back in the Sunday School Bonanza world and excited to participate again and talk through some lessons. Yeah,
we love our good Kurt. Kurt, tell us just real quick, how's stuff been going at Leading LDS? You've had a pretty exciting 12 months, I would say.
Oh, yeah, right? Man. So I've learned a lot. We've grown a lot. We are officially a nonprofit, 501c3 company, nonprofit, or
just
corporation,
like the church.
You could say.
Just like the church.
That's right. So send us an additional 10%, and we'll be happy. No, and so we went through
Kurt's
that
in the state
nightmare.
presidency, by the way, so there you go.
Hey, I'm always looking for every moment is a fundraising opportunity, you know, in my world now. So, so we got the podcast going. We've revamped the website. A lot of good resources and events coming up that we're putting together. We're going to do some 2 or 3 or 4 online summits this coming year in 2017, and if you listeners out there are a bishop or Relief Society president or a leader of any capacity, come check us out. And if you know one, tell them to come check us out.
There we go.
We've got a lot of good thought happening at Leading LDS.
It's very busy. And if I can do a pre-plug, we're going to be doing a bit of a co-interview thing shortly.
Yes.
So you'll get it on Kurt's, and you can also on the This Week in Mormons podcast. We'll
that'll be fun
there as well. So that'll be fun too. Well, folks, this is a great lesson. It's called I Had Seen a Vision. I wonder what it's about.
First vision, Jeff.
Okay.
First vision.
Yes, the first vision. So we're going to talk a lot about the first vision in general. Basically, the materials for this lesson, no Doctrine and Covenants. The whole thing is Joseph Smith history and our heritage, as well as some other material. And what I'm really excited about with this year is we have the same basic manual that we had 4 years ago, the last time we did Doctrine and Covenants and church history. However, they have added in links and supplemental material related to especially some of the gospel topics essays that have come out in recent years. Also, there's a new publication on the church's website called Revelations in Context. They've put out a lot of new stuff to help us get a better understanding, particularly of church history. And I think that's good because I am not a scholar of church history by any means. And
that's why you called me, Jeff. That's why
exactly why. But that's why people have struggled. And the first vision is even one of those things where you find, sadly, people say, "Oh, there's multiple accounts of it. What's up with that? I've got problems," you know.
Yeah, and I don't think Sunday school teachers ever brought up the multiple accounts in a traditional Sunday school class. So this is cool that the church is putting this out there and almost encouraging to have that discussion. It doesn't have to dominate your lesson.
And that's what we need to do. And we're going for more of that transparency now of saying, hey, we've had nothing to hide. Maybe we haven't pointed towards this stuff before, but let's be a little more open about it so people don't feel like they were caught off guard. The downside to this, though, is I've realized all this great new material is not linked in the student manual that none of you ever read, so I guess it doesn't matter. It's only in the teacher's manual, but it's there. Now, before we get into it, I would love, as I often do, to talk about the attention activity, which this is a weaker one. I'm giving this a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10. This one's not very strong. So you're supposed to bring a clock, a map or a globe, and a piece of clothing.
An article of men's clothing, Jeff.
Men's clothing.
It could be anything.
Could be
a sock.
Anything. Could be a hat that Pharrell wears. Anything you want. It could be that. And you're supposed to show. No, you can explain it, Kurt. You know where we're going with this. So what do you do with the 3 pieces of clothing before the class starts?
You show the clock and the map or the globe, and then you label, and they're labels to class members. So
good labeling.
And I explain, then you explain that this lesson discusses how the Lord prepared the right time and the right place
the
for
globe.
the restoration and his gospel after many centuries of the apostasy. So right
then
time, right place,
and the
right
right
mind. Same
and the right
bat
man.
channel,
The
same
right
bat
man
time.
with the clothes. Yeah. So
the right man, yes. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, don't use that one if you're teaching. If you do, you get 3 demerits. I dissuade you from using that.
You will be reported to Sunday School Bonanza.
Yeah.
We'll blacklist you.
I will come to get you. America. So anyway, let's get into it. I believe Kurt is going to lead us off here, just with a little bit of ground.
So obviously, the apostasy this is the end of the apostasy with the first vision, but that doesn't mean nothing happened prior to the first vision to prepare for the restoration of the gospel. And as we've learned from President Uchtdorf a few years ago, that the restoration is still carrying on, and we're living in it, and it's fantastic. So, this is an opportunity to take with the class to talk about some of the preparations that were made, and some of the things that were lost. The priest authority's gone, no prophets, apostles. Nature of God is lost. The doctrines are corrupted. Ordinances are changed, and the church obviously becomes divided. And so. Great, they've got some sections here about the Renaissance, the Reformers.
When things got better. Yes.
Yeah. As we're coming out of this, the Dark Ages, the Great Apostasy, and I think even in the Gordon B. Hinckley manual,
we just had this
on
Sunday.
We just talked about Reformers. So you could tie that in, and then obviously America was discovered, the Constitution, which we love in the church, and how it gave religious liberty to a place that maybe wasn't as familiar with religious liberty. And then the boy kneeled down and prayed, and boom, here we are, restoration. But really cool stuff.
That was a fun way to blow through it, folks. If I can recommend a great study, I love studying the apostasy. It's a fascinating bit of history, both with the scriptures that prophesied of it, of course, the falling away, all the ones in is it Amos, where they talk about, we would go thirsting, looking for the truth, and would find it not, things like that. It's very interesting. And then as it evolved into stuff like the Nicene Creed, where religious scholars debated for days on the nature of God. And it's amazing that we have something like the first vision that, even though we're going to talk about multiple versions, greatly clarifies things like the nature of God and the Godhead and our role in things, which is fascinating. That's why the first vision is so powerful, because I feel like so many, even seemingly minor things, were clarified very quickly, and that's a huge blessing. And also,
these are a lot of these are a lot of concepts that now it just seems we just take it for granted, right? That,
it's true.
Of course, God is like us. He looks like us, flesh and bone. He's him and Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ are two separate beings. But it's hard to think back that and realize there was a time that stuff just wasn't even considered because of these things that you mentioned that happened in the apostasy, the Nicene Creed, and those things.
Yeah, and Trinitarian notions and such. And that's interesting because as a Latter-day Saint raised in the church, it's always made sense to me that there would be two distinct corporeal beings, right? As Father and Son. Like, I get that. I think, to me, logically, I like it. And it's not slamming any other faith by any means, but a prevalent attitude in the world is that, of course, God, the Father, Jesus, the Holy Ghost are somehow, one, physically one, which is a very interesting notion and one that's prevailed for a very long time. And yet, through something like the first vision, where we saw two distinct personages that very clearly articulated and demonstrated that there is a Heavenly Father and His Son, Jesus, as distinct beings, which, like you said, is something we take for granted. And I think it's something also as Christians, we often fail to realize that our fellow Christians don't share that exact same view.
Right.
And because it seems logical, I think, to many. And so it's also good to be aware of that and realize that if you're buddies with your fellow Christians, the even nature of the Godhead is different. And that's why a lot of Christians view Mormons as apostates, because they also think we believe in a different God in that sense. Because we don't believe
it's completely
in this,
different.
Yeah, in this Trinitarian thing. So back to Joseph Smith then, I guess. Basically, the second section, it talks a lot about how Joseph Smith was prepared.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is stuff you've heard before, of course. He came from a good family. His family was good. They were religious. His parents cared a great deal about finding the truth and about living a religious life as well. You even find that Lucy felt it was her duty to be baptized, so she wanted to be a Presbyterian, for example. They really studied these things out. And we talk about those religious revivals that were going on at the time. And the exact dates were different. It wasn't like there was an ongoing, just like a 40-year stretch where everyone in New England was just freaking out about trying to find church, but this was definitely something that affected Joseph Smith in his youth and helped prepare him to try to find truth. Now, if I can pivot to some of these versions of the first vision, all right? And I say this because part of this is where Joseph Smith's mindset was, which is why I want to get into that. So we have 4 main accounts that were from Joseph Smith and a number of other ones that came from others who said that Joseph Smith had related it to them at some point. Now, of these various accounts, we have one from 1832, which was the only one written in Joseph Smith's own hand, basically in a diary. This one's very interesting, and I'll get back to it in a second. The 1835 account was when Joseph retold the account, and it was written by Warren Parrish, and it really emphasizes more about his attempt to discover the correct church. The 1832 one is a lot more about about introspection and trying to overcome sin. The one we're all familiar with is the 1838 account, the classic one, which has some amazing and powerful language that many of us are familiar with, that I think I can still recite in Spanish, probably better than English in my head.
Nice.
from my mission days, right? And then there was one written in 1842 in response to editor John Wentworth in the Chicago Democrat. It was printed in Times and Seasons, but it kind of went. The Wentworth letter, as you know, was also part of the genesis for the Articles of Faith. Mm-hmm. And that one was written much more for a public audience. And so we have all these different accounts. And it's very interesting when you try, you put them all together and see what's there, what's not there, and there are differences in them. And the one I want to go back to, 1832, is very interesting because unlike the other accounts that talk a little bit more about the need to find the truth and find the truth of God and bring that to the earth and build the kingdom, which Joseph Smith related, years after the church was organized. The 1832 one deals so much in Joseph Smith dwelling upon his own feelings of sin and iniquity and how much he was basically looking for a remission of his sins. And that's what drove him to try to find God and have an understanding. He even felt through study and prayer that he felt there was not truth that he could find among the different churches. And I think it's so neat to me to study that. I don't see that as someone who has discrepancies in his account. I saw that as someone who, with his understanding of that point in his life, instead, because of his upbringing and the way he was prepared, really felt a need to overcome the mortal flesh. And that's what drove him in many ways to seek this truth and to seek a better understanding from God. And that's a crucial thing in that the Lord appeared to him and told him that his sins were forgiven. And we don't usually talk about that from the more known 1838 account. I think it's just great. It's awesome.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, that was the driving force that Joseph Smith was constantly, I think, concerned about in his mind, looking at different religions and saying, how can I really, receive this remission of my sins or forgiveness of my sins? And obviously, I think it's important that the Lord mentioned that to Joseph in that account. The other thing about, these different accounts that I've learned recently, as far as, back in the early church, as opposed to now the first vision is such a pillar in our teaching, as missionaries, or we bring it up, it's usually in the first lesson, at least it was back when we served, and we put so much emphasis on this pivotal moment, this pivotal prayer where the first vision happened, where back then early on, it wasn't, it wasn't held in that regard as much, and not that it was diminished or thought of less important, but I think they just had a different approach, and it was different society, different time, and so I think now, what that led to, these different versions, and maybe they're a little different here and there, but nonetheless now, I think what spins them off into maybe a faith crisis is realizing, well, if this is such an important, pillar in our religion, how could it vary from, even these details, even though the details may not be significant, but nonetheless, I think it's important to understand the evolution of the first vision in our theology.
Yeah. And it's funny, and this is just me, this is just conjecture, but I viewed Joseph Smith as being someone who had this experience. It's very clear when you read the 1832 account that he was not learned at all, which is funny because the Book of Mormon had been published by that point. But which also speaks to, I think, his inability to write it himself, because you see his actual handwriting, and it comes off like a very uneducated person trying to express himself. And he said on the record he felt inadequate in that sense, trying to express himself through writing. I think I lost my train of thought a little bit there. Kurt, just terrible. This happens to me. Now
it does, but Jeff, now you're the Sunday school teacher. You teach gospel doctrine, so just don't let it happen during class.
Oh, well, if it does, that's when I just vamp for a little while, and I just give it to, I hope somebody raises his or her hand, and I'll have it written down.
Nice.
But it's so cool to see these different accounts. And there's of course, there's stuff you can pick apart. And accounts probably change over time based on, I think, one's own understanding. And I really think that he might have seen this as a sacred thing that he didn't really discuss very much beforehand. Because like you said, the Restoration era was a lot more about, Moroni and the Book of Mormon and those sorts of things. And it really wasn't until Joseph F. Smith was president of the church back in the early 20th century that efforts were made by him to really canonize the First Vision account. And that's when Joseph Smith history became part of the Pearl of Great Price. And that's when it became one of those powerful pillars of Mormonism. And of course, there were years leading up to it before that, but you'll even find accounts from prophets, many after Joseph Smith, who even had different understandings of what was related to them through that experience. So it saddens me that people would focus on that which is a bit different, or what might be missing, or that in the 1832 account he says Lord singular, even though later on he says two people, but even that's open, because you could argue that the Lord opened the path and opened the heavens, and then the Lord, the same, because he's called Heavenly Father and Christ Lord, they both could have come out in different instances. But the main things that we see in all of them are Joseph has questions about religion, he searches the scriptures for truth, he has a vision, and he speaks with God. So whether or not angels were present, like in the 1835 account, or not, we know that Joseph sought truth and received a divine visitation to do that. And have you ever been to the Sacred Grove, Kurt?
I have, actually, and I think I took a flower out of the Sacred Grove, and I thought back later, I probably shouldn't have done that. I don't think they like us taking that, because if everybody took one, we would just have a picked over, dried up forest. So
it would be the
so
sacred,
I apologize
the sacred
publicly.
deforestation. Yeah, that'd be terrible.
Yeah. So, but yes, I have been there. It's a great spirit there, and I'd recommend anybody visit.
And what I really enjoyed being there is, while you do have missionaries with you when you tour, the home reconstructions and such, they leave you to your own devices to wander the grove, and no one says this is where it happened. It's just a bigger space of land in the woods, and it's just somewhere you can just wander around and ponder.
We don't exactly know where or when, to the date that it happened, but it happened. That's what matters.
That is what matters. So there's obviously there's a bunch of terrific stuff here that we can barely touch on, but think about the things we've learned from the first vision. God the Father and Jesus Christ are separate beings, that they live, that we are humans created in the image of God. We have the accounts of the power of Satan, but God's power was stronger. God answers prayers, of course. And we learned that while the churches that existed had good things, they had strayed from the full truth, and the authority of God was not on the earth. We learned a lot from the first vision. That set the stage for all sorts of things going forward. So that's sort of the gist, folks. I really hope you will take the time. We'll put some links up over at This Week in Mormons. Take the time to read some of the supplemental material. It's very, very useful. Kurt.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
It's good to be back in the saddle.
Yeah, man. Everybody go to leadinglds.org now.
That's right.
And visit him and see the great podcasts and materials he has to help you out. Visit us at thisweekinmormons.com, of course, and follow everyone's social media channels. It'll be great. We thank you for joining us on Sunday School Bonanza. Lesson 3, I had seen a vision, and I hope you have a really productive Sunday with this lesson. It can be a great one. And have a great Sabbath day. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.